Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and here, as promised, is the video on 10 books for autumn. These are books which are in the classic section, but some of them have been quite forgotten, and I've read none of them, and I'm wondering which ones you have and would recommend, or which ones catch your interest. So without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? So the first book on my list is a crime novel. I do love a good suspense intrigue crime novel in autumn. It's the right atmosphere for it. A goose flesher, as Bertie Wooster would call it, from P.G. Wodehouse. Now this one is by a writer called Maurice Proctor, and it's called The Midnight Plumber. Interesting title. Now, Maurice Proctor actually used to work in the police. He finally gave it up when his books began to sell. So he has an insight into actual crime taking place and how the police and detectives work. Now in this book, our protagonist, Detective Martineau, who appears in many of his other books, is hunting down a mysterious gang leader known as the Plumber. The gang is notorious in the northern town of Grantchester for committing thefts, big thieveries, operating in the night time, but murder becomes involved as well. And as Martineau tries to track down who this gang leader is, this kingpin, he finds that everybody is too terrified to share any information. And so you have a psychological chase, and a thread of suspense apparently hangs over this novel. And it's all, takes place in the rainy streets up north, which is typical of autumn for me. I always think of the slick, silver-reflected pavements of England when I think of autumn, obviously because I grew up there. So there you go, that's the first one, The Midnight Plumber by Maurice Proctor. Have you even heard of it before? Next on our list is a book that I've actually been intrigued about for a while and keep meaning to get it. It's sort of permanently sat in my to-buy list. And it is Alexanderplatz by Alfred Döblin. Now, in this book, our protagonist is one Franz Bieberkopf, and it's 1920s Germany. Now, Franz has just been released from prison and is determined to go straight, to start a new life for himself. But things aren't quite to be that way. It's not as easy, especially when you think of 1920s Germany after the First World War. There is a lot of political strife on the street. There is food shortage. There is economic problems. And then with that comes crime as well, and the questions about the urban morality. So all of this is explored as Franz is pulled almost against his will into a life he doesn't want to follow. And it all takes place in the greyed and wettened world of Berlin. It's got, I tell you what I think about it in my head, and I haven't read it, but I imagine that kind of mood, which is normally a grey mood, would match Alone in Berlin, which is a real favourite book of mine. But this book is more experimental. It's a modernist book, so you get stream of consciousness, you get multiple narrators or perspectives, you get fragmented writing. So it's not just for a lounging read, it's one to make you sit upright and contemplate and think and try and keep track of everything that's going on. So that was the second one, Alexanderplatz by Alfred Döblin. Now, third up is an author I nearly always read in autumn. Even though some of his works take place in the tropics, there is something so autumnal about his style of writing. And I don't mean falling brown leaves. There's just such that laden atmosphere. And that is Joseph Conrad. Now, I was looking through my books and I came across this one, The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad, which many moons ago, I'm sure I read because I have a vague recollection of the story. But it may be I read it too early and I've forgotten or didn't finish the book, because it tells the story of Adolf Verloc. And I remember him being an anarchist and working for a foreign government as a secret agent, hence the title. And I do remember some incident with a bomb. Was it in Kew Gardens or was it Greenwich College? It's somewhere around there in London. Anyway, there's a Mr. Vladimir who's like an ambassador for this foreign nation. And he gets Adolf Verloc, who's running this like pawnbroker's shop, also selling dodgy stuff as well, to carry out a bombing in London because he wants to cause a bit of anarchy and worry and terror. This is actually taken from a real life event, which Conrad basically took and turned into the story, which is unlike Conrad. I don't think he does that much. I don't think he takes real life events very often. And the bombing, if I recall rightly, didn't go right. And then it's about the fallout. And I'm not sure whether that's where I failed to finish reading it. Maybe it was too hard for me when I was younger. I always class Conrad as one of those harder to read authors. He makes you concentrate. He's a Polish writer writing in very literary English. And he does make you sit up and pay attention, but he captures solitude quite well, even when you're surrounded by people. And that might be interesting to see here, because you've also got an immigrant to the British nation, so not exactly completely part of society. So that's the next book, The Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. Have you read this book particularly, or do you like Joseph Conrad? I would recommend him as a reader, particularly if you like realist or modern literature. The next book up is by a great German author, Thomas Mann, better probably known for his magnificent tomes of Buddenbrooks and what's that other one? The Magic Mountain. But this is a book that's sort of, maybe it's well known in Germany, but it's dropped off the radar in a lot of other countries. I imagine Dickens is the same. You know, in other countries, people know Dickens and might know Great Expectations and Oliver Twist, but they probably may not be aware of things like Dombey and Son and Martin Chuzzlewit. Anyway, this book is Lotte in Weimar, and it's actually based upon the great classic, The Sorrows of Young Werther, by Johann Goethe. I keep mispronouncing this, but you'll forgive me if my pronunciation is not very good. So what happens here is Thomas Mann tells the story of the woman who inspired The Sorrows of Young Werther, and that was a woman called Charlotte Kestner, and she had a romance with Goethe himself. And in this story of Lotte in Weimar, it's the story of Charlotte coming back to meet Goethe, and they pick up where they left off. She gets introduced into higher society, immediately accepted because of her relationship with the great philosopher, writer, and polymath. And it's an exploration of memory, of romance, of old loves, of society and its attitudes, but handled by an absolutely brilliant writer. I must admit, when I was doing the research for this video, I had forgotten about this book. As soon as I read it, I thought, oh, I remember hearing about this, and that it's really valued by a lot of people. And it's a very nostalgic tone, which is great for autumn. And so I scribbled this one down straight away because, you know, how exciting is that to get the inspiration to one of the truly great romantic novels, which shapes the attitudes of young ones all over Europe back in its day. The next book on the list is a Japanese classic, which I do believe I've mentioned once before in a video where I was beginning to research classics from Japan. And it's Snow Country by Kawabata. Now, this is apparently perfect for autumn reading. Lots of landscape description, lots of introspection, inner thoughts going on that the reader gets to learn from the protagonist, who is a wealthy businessman from Tokyo called Shimasura. He's wealthy, introverted, but emotionally detached as well. And the vibe is sort of that sense of an ending, decaying, like a leaf falling off, if you were to use that as a metaphor in life. Because he meets in a hot spring town in the mountains of Japan, a geisha called Komoko, I believe her name is. And their lives become entangled. And he's particularly drawn and fascinated to her and she to him. But he keeps himself detached and he goes back and forth numerous times from Tokyo up into the mountains, and you follow their story. And apparently it's very, very poignant and handled beautifully. And I've seen this book recommended many, 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 many times. But I thought, because of its vibe, that stance just between autumn and winter, between the rains and the snows, I just thought it might be the right time to possibly read it. I can't read all of these 10 in these 3 months because I have other commitments as well. But this one may well be one that I go for. I mean, what do you reckon? Which ones do you reckon I should read? Do you like books that probe your personal consciousness, that ask very deep questions about existence? I do like these kind of books. I always like to have a book for the evening in autumn as well, separate from the day. And the one that I've got on this list is actually from someone who, I've never read a novel by him, and it's Jean-Paul Sartre, his book Nausea. Now, in this book you have an isolated, sort of keeps himself to himself historian called Antoine Requentin. There's my French for you. And anyway, he lives in this made-up village, Bouville, I believe it was called. Now, he starts to become nauseous with life, hence the title. He starts to feel disgusted with the way of the world around him. And the more that happens, the more inward he begins to think. He starts to think about what is the meaning of life, not lice. He asks questions pertaining to choice and the consequences of your choice. How to get meaning in an indifferent universe. Now, why I'm intrigued by this book is because I often say novels are philosophers or philosophy's best critics. Philosophy works in theory. And of course, Sartre was a philosopher himself. But getting a philosophy, an idea, and stuffing it in the mind of a human being in a book, and then forcing that human to walk and live through it, really helps find the problems inside a philosophical idea. And so this one sort of appeals to me. It is, Sartre was an existentialist, so there's some pretty grey and downhearted kind of ideas in that. So it will be interesting to watch a character be infused with the philosophy itself as a way to explore it and see where I connect and where I disagree on things. So that was the next one, Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. The next book on our list is by a great Russian writer. And if you are a kind of person who just likes observational writing, if you like short stories, you like people, just looking at people and their environment, then this one might be right up your street. And I'm certainly curious about it as well. And it's Sportsman Sketches by Ivan Turgenev. Now, this book, your narrator is a sportsman who's going through the countrysides of Russia. And it's just sketches of life. It's about the people he meets on the way of various times he's out sporting, whether that be peasants, whether that just be some local workers, craftsmen, whether it be landowners. The sportsman tells of his interactions and describes the countryside and the scenery. He talks about the relationship of people with the land. He talks about social conditions, economic conditions, class disparities. But from what I understand, it's not some deep thinking treatise on the need for social reform, as it is just a book about human beings. And I personally love that. I'm actually thinking of doing a video based on something one of our patrons said in my Patreon community, which was books in which nothing happens and yet for some reason is fantastic. So I'm wondering whether a sportsman's sketches or sketches of a sportsman will fit the bill there. Tell me, has anyone read that one? The next book on our list is a most beautiful, short, aromatic, comforting, calming, introspective non-fiction work. And it's written by the Japanese author Okakura Kakuzo. It's called The Book of Tea. The reason I bring this to your attention, because I have actually read this one, I read it not long ago actually, and will be reading it again, is because I think a lot more people should know about it, and I am in the stages of just finishing off the audio recording for it. So please let me know down below if you'd be interested in having an audiobook done by me, but this is purely non-fiction, but it is sumptuous. It's so beautiful. Okakura is writing about the tradition of tea through the ages, starting in China, how it was adopted into Japan, the 3 ages of tea and the different way tea was made. You see, one of the things Okakura was talking about is how the West had come over in the colonial days, and Western culture was seen as better than Eastern culture. Eastern was, not as sophisticated. It didn't have the industrialization and all that kind of jazz. And so there was that sort of imperial arrogance. But he mentions, isn't it interesting how most of the Eastern traditions weren't adopted by the West except tea? There was something universally human where all hemispheres could meet in the teacup, is how he puts it. And he goes through just the attitude of mind towards the ceremony of tea, the implements that make it, the way it was brewed, the way people met to drink over it, and its development, and how it became a fascination with the West as well. It's a very thoughtful book, and I tell you, if you like being mindful, this is an ideal book to listen to or to read yourself, because it makes you appreciate the simple things in life. I think that's the epitome of tea. It's the simplicity of it, the elegance of it, the proper refinement of it, and yet the pure naturalness of it. So that was the next one, The Book of Tea by Okakura Kakuzo. The last 2 books on this list are not classic books at all. They were written in the 21st century, because I do read books other than classics, But these 2 books have got quite high acclaim and rave reviews by many a reader. Now, the first one I want to mention is Daniel Mason's North Woods. I read Daniel Mason's The Piano Tuner and was absolutely delighted with it. I think I have somewhere on my channel a recommendation video on that book itself. So North Woods fits the autumnal vibe, doesn't it? Because we're going right back and looking at the history of a continent taking place in the history of one house. A house set in the North Woods, in the original colonies. There are multiple protagonists. It's a story of lives lived, of chance happenings, of memories, of fears. If you like the word sonder, which means where you want to see the world through someone else's eyes, actually, I wonder how they see the world. This is a book that apparently epitomizes that idea. You'll get a Puritan couple turning up to, I believe, build the actual lodge itself. You have a fleeing English soldier from the Independence Wars. You have twin sisters. You have a con man. You have a mother and her son in desperate straits. You have a lovelorn artist, apparently. Singular events happen, like I believe a pip drops out of someone's pocket. I believe that may even be the soldier, and it grows into a tree. And of course that then is there through all the centuries, but no one gives much thought to it. It's the story of life happening before us, life ongoing, insignificant moments which leave their mark. And that to me, I mean, if you want to know what kind of books I'm into, that's right up my street. My favourite thing to read about is life. Life, the grand play, with all of its trivialities. In fact, I find that most of the beauty in life, not in the great things, but its grandeur is in the infinitely small and accidental. So that's North Woods by Daniel Mason. Have you read it, and would you recommend it? Leave a comment down below. The last book on our list is also a 21st century novel, and you might be surprised I've not read it because it is a world bestseller. This book was very, very popular, and I've been told to read it by many people, just haven't got round to it. It's been sat on my shelf for a long time, and apparently it's got a good autumnal vibe. It is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, or I don't know how he pronounced the second name. So, The Book Thief, tell me if you've read it and if you would recommend it. If you don't know it, I'll tell you the rough plot as I understand it. So you have a girl called Liesel or Liesel in Germany. This is during Nazi Germany's period, arrival of the war. And she's staying with her foster parents. And one of them doesn't, they're not particularly favourably disposed to the politics of the Nazis. And so they hired a Jewish man, Max Huberman, if I remember the name correctly. And Max and Lizal, they form quite a close bond. He teaches her how to read and write, and she gains a love of literature and a love of stories and the importance of sharing them. In fact, she begins to write her own. She has her own document that she puts together. And Max and her bond, but they're rumbled, and Max, out of fear, needs to leave the home. And so the story progresses. There are a few bits I do know about, which I'm not going to mention in case they're spoilers. And then, years and years later, it's summed up when she's an old lady by the figure of death itself. And apparently it's quite a melancholic book, and yet it's got humour in it, and tragedy, but it's poignant. It's a reflection on humanity more than anything else. And of course, if you're a big reader, then maybe a book that's called The Book Thief. Oh, apparently there's thievery takes place as well. Maybe that should be something that should be high up on my list. So that was the last one for an autumn read, apparently, is The Book Thief. Tell me if you've read that and would you recommend it? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video of 10 books to read in autumn, which I haven't read. But this is like me shopping. I'm sharing with you what I've found out about these books and why I think they sound exciting and how they appeal to me. Just let me know which ones you've read down below. Which ones maybe would you prefer me to read? Because I can't read all 10 over the next 3 months because I've got plenty of other things going on and other books to read as well. But yes, feel free to also recommend books that you think have a really, really good autumn vibe down below. And make sure you scroll through the comments because you might just pick up a great recommendation. Until the next time, I wish you joy in whatever you read.